Hi there, this is Ryan Chatterson, and during today's session we're going to discuss integrated pest management design for pesticide-free produce production in an aquaponics system. So one of the first steps that we need to undergo is identifying the pest that we're actually trying to deal with in our specific situation. Before planting the first seed, you want to research the specific crops you're growing. Maybe lettuce, squash, tomatoes, peppers, basil, whatever it may be. And it could be several different types, but go ahead and research those varieties in your specific location and see what the typical pests that come to your crop are going to be. You can tell this before you ever plant the first seed. Okay, predict which pests you will encounter. Find a reliable source for beneficials, so for beneficial insects, mites, etc. And I've got some listed here in just a few slides. But a lot of times it's easier to find a local source or somebody that's close to you. Shipping is less because a lot of these things have to be shipped overnight in order to get to you live. So try to look for someone local and reputable. Employ exclusionary methods if possible. And we'll talk about this a few times, but exclusionary methods are screening. So like a screen house, a screen structure around where you're growing vegetables, a greenhouse, foot baths, row covers, foot baths at the entrance and exit. These things will all help to keep unwanted pests and antagonistic pathogens out of your greenhouse space and growing environment. And that's what we want to do. If we can keep them out in the first place, we don't have to employ near the numbers or near the effort to control them inside the greenhouse, okay? So exclusionary methods are huge. If you're growing outdoors, of course that's not possible. Outdoors without building any kind of structure, maybe on a low dollar build, you can't always build something around your growing area. But that's just like typical farming, and if you're pesticide free when you're typical farming, the rule is basically you overplant because the pests are going to take some of your crop and you're going to get some. And that's how you work with nature, and that's how people farmed for a long time until we became heavily reliant on pesticide usage. Okay, so just expect that you will have some loss because of pesticide or pests influx on your garden, but also you'll get the beneficials that come in and help you out. And I can tell you from many years of strict outdoor growing with no pesticides that you can really do a good job and produce a lot of great food. If anybody that saw my career before I came here to Chatterson Farms and built my greenhouse, everything was done outdoors other than the rooftop greenhouse that I managed. Everything looked beautiful. I grew hundreds and hundreds of varieties of crops. And though I did see pests come in a healthy system, these plants are robust and they don't attract the mass numbers of pests that you get in an unhealthy system with weak plants. So weak plants send off distress signals, and these distress signals are what bugs, these bad bugs, pick up on. And it basically tells them what's the easiest spot to go to extract these juices. That's what the bugs listen for. They say, oh, that's a weak plant. It's real easy for us to get in there, attack it, and get what we want. And that's what happens. So if you keep a strong, healthy crop, that also is going to help keep down the bad pest influx, because it's not easy for them to withdraw plant juices. It's not easy for them to come over and just take over the area because you've got strong cell walls and healthy plants, okay? So that plays into it, but we'll go from there and move on to the next slide. As you plant your first seeds, set up pest traps to identify insects. Yellow sticky traps, fly paper, that sort of thing. You can buy these readily at any greenhouse superstore, any kind of garden supply store. And it's basically just a sticky piece of paper. And we hang it in the greenhouse near our plants, and we don't use it necessarily to capture bugs. We want to use it so that we can identify the insects, okay? This gives us a sampling of what's in the environment. We take that sticky paper, look at it under our loupe or magnifying glass, and see what's actually flying around in the environment. Without doing this, we can rely on internet research, on talking to other farmers, but nothing's going to tell you the facts like a real sticky trap in your greenhouse. Even where I'm at now, I see different pests and different, say, species of aphids than I did when I used to grow crops 30 minutes away down the road. Completely different species that I never dealt with before. So it's good to know what you're dealing with, and because of that, we buy some traps, and they're really, really inexpensive. You can probably even make some yourself with some glue and some kind of something, I don't know, look it up online. But I would just buy them, they're really cheap. In a new growing area, these initial traps will help you to forecast the problems you're going to see in the future. So just initially, you can tell what's going to come in, and if you keep them hanging, you can tell if you start to see more and more bugs attached to these films at higher rates, then you know, hey, the populations are building, something's happening here. Get a handle on the situation before it gets out of control. You will see bugs at some point in your operation, but we would rather catch the first wave than the backup troops coming in to finish up the job. Okay, that's a real easy way to think about it. I don't care where you're at. Again, rooftop greenhouse, $1 million operation. I had more insects come to that operation than I've had in the rest of my aquaponic career. They can appear in places you would not expect them to appear. So I would really suggest that you recognize you're going to get this. This aquaponics isn't magic. It doesn't mean you'll never get a bug on your plants. Anybody that sells you that is selling you up the stream. The one truth in that is that, hey, healthy plants do ward off insects better than weak plants. So we want to keep strong, healthy plants, and that'll help us in our journey. But be prepared for these bugs, and again, forecast it before they come in and explode in your greenhouse and you're trying to figure out what to do. I suggest using a 30x jeweler's loupe, so 30 times magnification, to inspect the leaf surfaces, or a magnifying glass daily in problematic areas, and that's to monitor populations. Even when you know they're present, you still want to monitor the populations, check out how quickly the clusters are growing and how quickly your beneficials are coming in, recognizing there's a problem there and eradicating that problem. I do this very often. Aphid populations will almost always be present in very small numbers, but our parasitic wasp control program keeps them, again, so minimal that we never see them on our produce, maybe on the underleaf of a couple specific target crops we plant that we know aphids are more attracted to. Like mustard greens, aphids really love mustard greens, and they're highly attracted to that. So we'll plant mustard greens or even a small bok choy or pak choy in an Asian cabbage in the corner of the greenhouse. Just 2 to 4 plants, but that's enough to bring the aphids to that area and allow our wasp populations to stay at controllable levels, meaning they can control the aphid population in the greenhouse. So there's always going to be a small amount. Again, if you don't have any bad bugs in the greenhouse, your good bugs are going to either starve or leave because they need a food source. So this is kind of a critical balance here, but I can tell you, a large growing area, we can have aphids in a 1 to 2 square foot area, and the other 3,500 square feet has no aphids. It's very plausible and very doable. You just have to plan it out and think about it. So plant those sacrificial crops before you actually see the aphids come in, before the problem arises, so that when they do, they're going to target those crops first, and you can let your beneficial populations build and destroy those bad bugs. Okay, treat problems at first sight and continue treatment regimen until there is no sign of bugs. Think of it like cancer. Even a little has a chance of coming back in a big way. Okay, you don't want to almost finish treating the bugs and just forget about it and say, oh, I'm sure they'll take care of themselves. Don't do that. Monitor the situation until it's eradicated. Do not wait for things to get infested before pursuing a treatment regimen. Okay? That might be doable when you're using pesticides to spray down crops and kill everything in sight. When you're using beneficials, there's a natural wave that's happening, okay? There's two waves. The first wave is your bad bugs, okay? Antagonistic bugs that are coming in and harming your plants. And they're going to come in at a low level and they're slowly going to start their climb, okay, in population. Right behind them is your beneficials, and they're going to start their climb. At a certain point, the beneficial climb is going to overtake the climb of your bad bugs, okay? And then you're going to see the bad bug population dwindle because you have such a large population of beneficials. But these waves are necessary in nature, and they're necessary in your greenhouse if you're not using pesticides. Because in order for a beneficial population to grow, they have to have a feed source, and there has to initially be a reason for them to either show up on their own or for them to stick around when you're inoculating the greenhouse. There has to be a feed source. So you're going to see bugs, you're going to see them start to do what they do, they multiply and spread, and then you're going to see your beneficial population follow that same routine as they overtake the bad bug population. It's important to realize because you may go out there and see a leaf that's covered in aphids, okay, where one day it had 10 aphids on it, 3 days later it has 150 on it because they're clustering and maybe ants are bringing some in there, whatever the case is. Well, that can cause alarm, and that is a cause for alarm, but you need to monitor the situation. Without aphids developing wings, they're not going to go anywhere but on those leaf surfaces. At a final stage, when that leaf is full of aphids and they're basically dwindling food resources, some aphids will develop wings, move on to a later life stage, fly out throughout your greenhouse and infest other areas. That's what you want to avoid. So we want to monitor these, but it's a very, I'd say, tricky situation where you need to get a little experience with this in monitoring when maybe it's beneficial to remove the whole leaf because there's so many aphids, they may be reaching that next nymphal stage or adult developmental stage and be getting ready to fly off. Where at a lower population, you want to leave them there to attract those beneficial wasps and other things in there to attack them and eradicate them. You don't want to just knock out the entire food source all the time, manually or by clipping leaves, whatever it may be. Because again, we're looking at this as 0 pesticides. Since my operation has been running, 0 pesticides. We don't spray Bacillus thuringiensis, we don't spray soap spray, we don't spray anything but hose water, right out of my well, just fresh water. That's the biggest pest deterrent we use other than live insects. And that's been since the start of the operation, and that was something that I deemed part of what I wanted to do. Now at a larger scale, that might not be worth it. It might be because nobody's paying for that pesticide-free label. They're paying for the organic label that allows 200 plus pesticides to be used. So you may fall in line with the organic label because that's what people actually trust and think is pesticide-free, but it would allow you to more easily manage pest problems in your greenhouses at large growing area, big growing area sizes, big operations, okay? Biggest takeaway here, don't wait for things to get out of control. It's like anything else. You wait till it's almost, at a 10, then it's going to be really hard to take care of the problem. Take care of it at first sight and continue, and it'll never get to that infestation, size. That size where you're like, what do we do? Do we tear down the whole greenhouse and burn it? Of course, that's just a joke. But bugs can be very frustrating. Again, one more takeaway here. Remember, there's natural cycles, and you're going to see some bugs before you see the beneficials come in and take care of that problem. So for identifying the best beneficial insect remedy for the identified pest, here's a couple websites here that are really great. And these are also websites where you can, again, buy these beneficial insects. So you've got BugLogical, which is, website buglogical.com. You've got Copert Biological Systems. I would recommend going here first because they have a lot of great pictures that help, for one, on identifying the pest that you're dealing with, and then they tell you all of the beneficials that work with that pest. On top of that, they tell you what kind of pesticides can be used with those beneficials and not kill the beneficial population, which you're not doing that, again, we're not spraying pesticides in this talk, but in a bigger operation that can come in handy because you can't spray pesticides and kill your beneficial population, or again, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. We've also got Arbico Organics, which is another great US source of beneficial insects. And then we've got Nature's Control down there at the bottom. There's many more. If you're one of my international students, again, hop on the internet, get on Google, and look for beneficial insects for greenhouse agriculture. Beneficial insects should bring up many producers, again, if you're in a country that actually produces them. If not, and you're somewhere where you don't have any access to beneficial insects, then what I recommend you do is you plant bait plants earlier in the season, okay? I'd say 3 weeks before you plant your main crops so that you can establish bad bug populations and actually encourage the natural good bugs from your environment to come in and attack those bad bugs. So you already have that life cycle started. You have your bad bugs in, you have your good bugs coming in to take care of the problem. At that point, when you start to see the tables turn and your population of beneficials is larger than the bad bugs they are destroying and they're eradicating them quickly, go ahead and plan out the rest of your crops and keep sacrificial plants in that greenhouse that sometimes I will weaken them a little, pull them out, let them, dry out for half a day until they're really droopy, stick them back in. Do something to stress that plant more than the rest of the plants in your system, and it will attract the pests first. It will bring them to that specific location, and again, it will bring feed in for those beneficial insects, and it will allow them to stay in a quarantined area where you basically told them where they're going to go. You put that in one spot, and that's your controlled area to keep providing beneficials and to keep an eye on the pest influx coming into your greenhouse. Just a couple personal tips there that have helped me out through the years, and hopefully you get the logic behind it. Bugs attack weak plants. If we can weaken a plant in the mass of our healthy plants, they're going to be attracted to that weak plant. So if we do that in a corner where it's not right in the middle of everything we're doing, we can very easily control the situation in a small confined area. All right, let's get into some awesome pictures here. We've got some aphids right here, all right? The aphids I'm going to talk about probably the most because that's the number one thing you're going to see. They're soft-bodied insects, and they pop up in most operations, and they like a lot of different types of vegetables. Okay, and in this picture specifically, you can see several different life stages of aphids. You can see up here, large adult aphids. Here you can see actually a ladybug larva feeding on aphids. And then you can see some of the smaller, really juvenile aphids here. Now, as an aphid is born, it's actually born pregnant. They're already born with another aphid in them. And as they develop, which happens very quickly, then they're going to start reproducing. So you can see how a cluster of 1, 2, 3 aphids within a week can turn into something that looks like this situation, okay? And this grower also has some mildew here on the leaf, just adding to the problems. So aphids, there's well over 40 varieties. They're commonly named for the type of plant that they feed on. So you'll see a peach aphid or a pear aphid, a lot of different potato aphid, things like that. Well, they're named because they're on potato plants, or they're on peach plants and have a peach color, or they're green and they're on pear plants. So you can kind of get the gist, but Identifying the specific type of aphid is really, I would say, not as important as just getting a good beneficial that eats aphids. So they really don't seem to be very picky on which type of aphid they eat. I can have 3 different types of aphids inhabiting my greenhouse at once, and the beneficial wasps and ladybugs will come in and eradicate them all without favoritism, as far as I can tell. So the aphids feed on plant juices by piercing the tissue surface and drinking the leaf juices. This is how a lot of these insects are actually eating off the plant. They pierce. You can think of it like the plant's bleeding, and then they're drinking that. Okay, they're drinking the plant juices. So biological controls for aphids. First off, we have aphid predatory mites. Okay. So we have several different types. We have Neoscelius californicus, we have Mesocelius longipes, we have Phytocelius persimiles, and we have Galandromus occidentalis. Okay, out of these, I would suggest Californicus. Okay, Californicus is a very well adapted to greenhouse predatory mite. And in my opinion, having used all of these different mites, you get the best results for the money you're spending with the Californicus. So if that's available where you're buying predatory mites, this is what I would choose. Even though the others do still get the job done, it's taken a few days longer, and the process has been a bit slower for me. These are delivered in usually a bran meal in a little container. It almost looks like a salt shaker, and you sprinkle this on infected areas. And these microscopic mites are going to crawl around. You don't see the mites. It's not like you're sprinkling a lot of large bugs on your plants. They crawl around, and then they get ready to attack your larval aphids that are coming right out of the mothers. Aphidoleides aphidomyza is a midge species, okay, a midge fly. If you're common with maybe seeing those in and around aquaponic systems or bodies of water, it's kind of like a false mosquito. They don't sting, but it's always around bodies of water. Well, this actually species of midge fly lays eggs right in the middle of aphid colonies. And as the larvae hatch, they eat the aphids and disrupt those colonies. And that's really best for large colony disruption. If it's getting out of control in your greenhouse and you're not going to use a pesticide, say because you're coupled with, running a coupled aquaponic system and you just don't want to use pesticides, this is a really good choice because they'll go in there and they'll burst up those large aphid colonies. So some other biological controls here are ladybugs. So that's a very common control. Is you buy ladybugs, you can usually get them, a few thousand for 10 to 20 US dollars. So they're not very expensive, and they do eat aphids. One of the problems is a lot of times these are all coming in from all over the country at different life stages, and they are pretty confused when they come out of shipping. Many of these, in my experience, 90% of these ladybugs will do nothing. They'll go off, they'll stick to the walls, they'll end up falling in the rafts, they'll die. They really don't do much for your crops. But that other 10% gets in there and they start eating right away, and they start laying eggs. And those eggs hatch, and the larval stages of ladybugs are also very good at eradicating aphid populations. So it's a nice, cheap way to keep aphids in check. And the name of the game with ladybugs is keep flooding that greenhouse with ladybugs on a regimented basis. So I would personally say if you're starting up and you want to use ladybugs, go by their regiments. They tell you how many to buy per square footage when you're buying from one of these companies. And for the first 4 weeks, inoculate every week when you see aphid populations. Inoculate every week, and then re-inoculate every 2 weeks from then on. And yeah, it might be $40 a month in ladybugs that you're spending, but that's the price for not having to buy any pesticides or spray any pesticides, and that's huge. And I have several operations that I consult for, several operations that I just know that I'm friends with the owners. And this is the methods primarily used to keep aphids out of their greenhouse and to produce pesticide free, okay? So that's a cheap, nice way. We primarily rely on parasitic aphid wasps, okay? Aphidius colmani is commonly used, and it's a highly selective breed of parasitic wasp that really looks more like a fruit fly. This does not look like a wasp nest flying, you know, with a bunch of wasps flying around your greenhouse. They look like a tiny fruit fly. You would never know it was a wasp unless somebody told you. But they actually are extremely good at controlling aphid populations. You can also use Aphidius urvi, Matriciae, and abdominalis as other parasitic wasps, and I think some of this is location dependent. If I'm in a warm, warm kind of wet location, I'm in Florida, if you're somewhere up north, sometimes you're going to favor urvi or Matriciae or abdominalis because they're more specific to your area. So we really want to use the beneficial that's more natural to our environment. Like the ladybugs, most of these are not native to the US. They're European breeds, things like that, and that's what is actually, they're over here bred in labs and they ship them out. But that's part of the reason they probably get a little bit confused. They're just, they don't come from this environment. So we'll say that a couple times throughout this, the speech. Try to use locally available species. I actually use I have an unidentified aphid wasp that I use for control here in Florida. It is not a colmani. I've bought colmani and used them, but the native wasps outperform the colmani. So we allow them, again, I bait them in at the beginning of the season. When we start to see aphids, they come in, their populations rise, and I keep a small aphid population in the corner of the greenhouse and keep a population of these parasitic wasps around. And they stay there year round, and they keep me free of aphids year round for free. Takes a little bit of maintenance just to make sure, again, we can stress plants, we have some aphids in there for them to feed off of, and the populations, again, they bounce. As the aphids die down, the wasps are going to go down too, and then the aphids are going to go back up and the wasps come back up. And we don't mind that little cycle happening as long as it's in the corner and not in the entire greenhouse and all of our crops, okay? So for the parasitic wasp, how this actually does its job is it will hunt down the aphid and pierce that aphid with its abdomen and place an egg inside of the aphid, okay? Very much like, the movie Alien. This thing puts an egg inside the aphid and then moves on to the next aphid. And if you see this done on microscopic videography, it's horrific. You will watch this wasp go up, nail an aphid, and all the other aphids around put their little antennas up and run for the hills. And they run as fast as they can because they can tell this one aphid's getting attacked and putting out a fear hormone. They can smell that hormone and it's telling them to run away. And as soon as he inserts his egg, the aphid pretty much stops moving. He runs off, he grabs somebody else, and he does it again. And he'll just keep nailing aphids over and over and over. The aphid stops feeding and turns into an aphid mummy. So they basically stop feeding and turn from, say, gold or from green into like a light goldish shell that's immobile. Okay, so their outer casing of their body hardens up while that egg and larva is developing inside them and eating them from the inside out. And then the wasp eventually emerges by cutting a round hole in the back of the aphid and crawling out as a wasp. What does that wasp do? He goes out and finds a new aphid and does the same thing. And they do hundreds of aphids a day that they parasitize per wasp. So highly effective killers, and not only do they kill, they're growing their population as they are doing this. And this is huge. And for me, this has been probably the #1 bug in my greenhouse, in my making a living doing aquaponics. He's made me a lot of money and saved me a lot of work and helped me to stay pesticide free, which is what we wanted to do in the operation. So take a couple pictures here. This is actually Neoselius californicus. So this is our predatory mite. And you can see the mite here. He looks kind of like a spider. And he's actually got a hold of this small aphid right here. and he's got a hold of him and he's sucking the juices out of him. And then he's gonna suck him up dry, he's gonna drop him, and he's gonna move on to the next aphid. And this is the container that you can see they will commonly be shipped in. It looks like a little bit of bran meal here, and the mites are living in there. They actually ship them with a feed source. There's a feeding mite in there that they are allowed to feed on, and it keeps them alive and healthy. Once you actually sprinkle that out on your leaves, the food source runs out, and they run out and attack the aphids and everything else. So there, again, it's kind of technical because we're dealing with live insects that are going through different life stages. So of course, they have to keep eating to make it to your farm alive. And these are very commonly shipped overnight only. So a bottle like that in the US may run you $40, $45, right around that if you just wanted a ballpark figure. So here's a great picture of a parasitic aphid stinging this, or wasp stinging this aphid, okay, and inserting an egg. He's running for the hills. You can see how small this wasp is. It just looks like a tiny fruit fly, and boom, he's nailing his abdomen right into them. He's inserting an egg in there, and this guy is done for, okay? He's gonna turn into an immobile mummy and get eaten from the inside out. What a horrible death. And here we can see the after effect, okay? This aphid mummy, nobody's hatched out of him, or he just died. But I'm guessing nobody's hatched out of him yet. Here we see this distinctive circular hole. And that's because the wasp chews a circular hole until that piece falls out, and then he exits the shell. So if you get in there with your jeweler's loop and you see little gold-bodied aphids that have hardened and they have this small distinctive hole on the back, you can bet that you've got parasitic wasps in there in your greenhouse carrying out their life function, whether you bought them or not. And again, many times these things will show up on their own because they sense food. Just like the bad bugs sense food, the good bugs will sense food if the bad bugs make it inside the greenhouse. Here's a picture of ladybugs, what it might look like when you get some ladybugs, and it's a lot. I mean, you're literally sprinkling these things everywhere, dumping them all over plants, and they get everywhere. A lot of them end up in the water in a raft system, I'll tell you that right now. But they're cheap. Again, what you see here is probably $10. It was not much money, and because of that low expense, we can really flood the greenhouse with them and get them to control our problems. And ladybugs also eat some other things other than just aphids, so they do help out. And that's it for this session. Again, if you have any questions at all, please email me, ryan@collegeofaquaponics.com, and I will be sure to cover those questions in our weekly question and answer session and make sure you get all the information that you need. Thank you very much.